Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 2 of The Punisher. Now, quickly, obviously, I'm going to be starting this off with non-spoilers, like I typically do for a little bit. Obviously, I will tell you when I start going into spoilers. But my general thoughts about the season, I thought it was a great season. I actually can't tell which one I like more, whether I like Season 1 or Season 2. It's hard to say because they're kind of both on the same level for me. They do a lot of interesting things. I think they kind of shifted up a lot of things that were built up in Season 1. Well, kind of obviously paying off a lot of stuff that like Season 1 ended with and kind of playing around with that. So I thought was kind of pretty interesting. Like a lot of the dynamics between the characters, in particular Frank's relationship with a lot of people, like certain things you saw them shift in interesting ways, and I'll kind of discuss that in a little bit. But just a lot of people's storylines not necessarily playing out the way I thought they would, and just like how the story ended up kind of, it's kind of spoilers but not really, but it's like if you've seen the trailer, like there's two separate things kind of going on at the same time, and seeing them how they kind of blend together yet not blend together, kind of remaining separate things, while also kind of just two issues are kind of bumping heads at the same time, essentially. So it's just kind of an interesting thing in that regard. Just as much bloody action. It's like, I think legitimately of all the Marvel shows on Netflix, like this is the bloodiest one. I'd say probably after this, I'd probably say Daredevil. But this show gets super bloody. It's like every time Frank gets into a fight, he walks away fucked up. So there's that, but I think they did a lot of interesting things. So if you have not seen all of Season 2, highly recommend you watch it. It is well worth your time, especially if you like Season 1, you're definitely going to like Season 2. Like I said, they do some interesting things, but do note that going forward, I will be going into spoilers. Do note that I'm going to be talking about the entire season and not in any particular order. I'm just going to be talking about things as they come to my head, so do keep that in mind. You have been warned. So a lot of interesting things, I think, that went down in this season. Well, for one, let's start off with Billy. I completely forgot about it because I had talked about it like in a TV, when I was talking about the TV show, like how when I did a video that was like thoughts and theories about, like I was like, oh yeah, Billy wasn't as messed up as I thought he would. I mean, especially after I went back and rewatched Season 1, especially all the bandages and stuff. I was like, Billy got jacked up. But to be fair, all the reconstructive surgery and stuff like that, the scars weren't as bad. Because like I said, I saw like one image of Jigsaw from like the comic books, and like he's pretty haggard. And so I think to compensate for that, they did the whole mask thing, which I did think was kind of interesting because it wasn't just something like they threw it in there. Like it had significance, especially the whole him and Dumont thing. Like that's the whole thing. Also interesting enough that being, I'm probably going to butcher her name because I always forget how to pronounce it. I think it's Floriana. I think it's actually pronounced Lima. I would say Lima, but I think it's Lima. I could be wrong. She played Maggie on Supergirl on the CW, and she also played Miranda in Lethal Weapon, so the TV show. So that was just kind of an interesting little thing. But I'm playing with his psychology this episode, and also making it, he ended up getting amnesia. They pointed that out in Season 1's finale. I'd completely forgotten about that until I rewatched it. I was like, oh, he potentially has memory loss, and it's like immediately start with him. I didn't expect that. I thought it was like, no, he's going to be back to himself. I thought like what they did with him kind of being a little inept most of the like season, kind of building his way back up to kind of being the Billy that he was before, but still being severely effed up, was kind of an interesting aspect to it, especially like I said with the whole Dumont relationship that he had. I didn't see that coming. Like I kind of felt like there was something there, but I did not realize she was going to go to the levels that she did. But you could tell there was like an infatuation there. And I thought it was kind of interesting because like she's kind of broken on the inside, like after her experience, like her scars ended up being nothing what I thought. I thought like, because we first saw the scars when she was like her sleeve first rolls up, you see those 5 lines. I'm like, oh, did she try to commit suicide or something like that? It's like, nope, it was a lot worse. I mean, her dad did, with the whole him throwing her out the window with himself. I was like, that's crazy. I knew it because the moment she was like, oh, there's something with the window and stuff like that, she's like, yeah, Phil. And I was like, yeah, she wouldn't tell the whole story. I knew that, but I didn't expect the story to be that. When she was telling it, I was like, your dad threw you out the window? And then it's like, oh no, if I can't have her, no one, even you can't. It's like, oh, that's it. And it's actually interesting because her mom never came up in the whole situation, so maybe her mom passed away or just mom's not just in her life, whatever the case may be. You would think her mom would be kind of like super in her life, and considering having something traumatic like that happen to her at such a young age. But to be fair, that kind of coincides very nicely with Billy's. Like I said, like they both suffered messed up stuff. Like Billy had that whole Arthur thing, which is kind of interesting that they tied that back in this season, because that was something like he just randomly, like, not really randomly, but he just like brought that up to Dina last season, and it's like it plays such a big role because obviously, like, with his memory as messed up as it is, certain, because it was interesting to me because certain things still clicked in his head. It's not like he had complete amnesia up to a certain point, because to him it's like, oh, him, Curtis, and Frank were still good. Frank was still his brother, like he'd forgotten everything. Which someone, I think Curtis brought it up later on. I was like, that was the irony behind it. You literally did that to him so he would remember, but you literally bashed like that memory out of his head. That literally Billy was the only one who didn't have to remember what he did, and everyone else had to live and suffer from it. That was the irony behind it, but I'll get to that in a second. But that whole Arthur thing, like, because it was such a pivotal trauma in his life, you know, because I mean, and that dude was such a monster, such a dick, being like, oh, you were so handsome as a kid. It's such a shame something like that happened to your pretty face. It's like, could you not be a disgusting piece of shit? Like, this is someone you did some terrible stuff to, and you're like, oh, they loved me back, but you were the only one. Like, I loved you, kids, and they loved me back. You were the only one that didn't want to love me back, and it's just like, it's that predatory angle of his, and kind of almost trying to belittle Billy in that regard. It's moments like that where you kind of felt a little bad for Billy, because it's like, especially the whole family situation that he came up from. You know, obviously learning a little bit about his mom last season and everything. So it was kind of interesting in that regard. But like the parallels between that, and I think that's what drove, because like she couldn't save her dad. So that's what this was all about. She was trying to fix Billy to kind of compensate for the person she couldn't save before, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing. But like them having sex, like her scratching him up, him digging into her scars, I'm like, that's some hardcore shit, dude. That's insane. But for things to kind of have played out the way they did, like that she ended up falling for him, even going to the point what she did with Frank, I thought was crazy. Like, and I love how they constructed that. I thought that was so interesting, like how they paralleled that, where it's kind of like, wow, like we cut back and forth a little bit to like Frank getting like beaten up by all the people from Valhalla. We'll just kind of, you know, skip around and stuff like that. But it cuts to that, and it cuts back to the conversation between Dina and Dumont. And I thought that was so interesting how they did that. And I was like, and the moment it was all kind of playing out like that, once we kind of got to the end and the ladies ended up dying, I'm like, I was like, dude, Dina gave them what they needed to break Frank. And like, I figured that out at the last second. I was like, that was so interesting how that was done like that. And Dina didn't even realize it. She was just venting, you know. And like, I liked how Dumont kind of nuanced that situation. She's very smart and very good at what she does. Because the entire time I thought it was kind of interesting, because I was like, you're willing to help Billy so much considering all the stuff that he did. And even she, I mean, it's hard to say, because it seems like stuff comes up later on to make it seem like she knew more than she lets on. Like, there's the whole like file and everything that kind of gives like the bullshit about what exactly went on. Because I kept wondering, they were like, oh, this is what Dina did to him. I'm like, Frank did it to him. Why is everyone saying it? It's like, no, because later on it's like, no, the lie, the official report says Dina's the one that jacked his face up like that. And I was like, oh, right, because you're trying to like remove Frank from the entire equation. I was like, I got it. So that's what all the lies were kind of based around. So it's also interesting too, kind of seeing, well, I'll get to that. Well, I'm skipping around, so I do apologize. But since I am talking about Dina, I was actually kind of surprised that they did what they did with her story, where it's just kind of like, it's actually interesting because, like, obviously the last season we delved heavily into the Homeland situation. It's kind of interesting this season they kind of pulled away from that, because we never actually saw her working on any Homeland cases. I mean, to be fair, Frank and that whole, like, I mean, she was, you know, got her own personal war that she was dealing with last season with everything that had happened to her friend, like that whole Cerberus operation and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, so that was like her personal stuff. So obviously that would blend into like the Homeland angle, but because that wasn't necessarily part of her story this season, like everything didn't really have, because Billy and Frank, that was always outside of the Homeland purview. So it's like, why would you focus on the Homeland element at all? You know, so it makes sense in, you know, in retrospect, but still. But her like drinking, apparently going to see Billy like every day, because for her, she had said it. It's like, I want him to remember what he did. Like, I want to pop up and so he can look me in the eyes and see I survived. He didn't, but it kind of didn't work out because it's like, I mean, she thought he was faking it, but it's like the whole memory loss thing is kind of like, no. It's not right. It's not fair. Like, you know, if that was the case for her, you know, because it's like you took that victory from her. And I thought it was kind of interesting how they handled that. Like, Dina was, and it's an element that all three characters shared, Frank, Curtis, and Dina, that whole parallel when it came to Billy. All of them were desperate to remove him from their lives, that they were willing to cross lines that they normally would have. And I thought that was kind of interesting how to handle Dina in this regard, because for her, it's like she was caught between her duty and, you know, what she wanted, her personal vendetta. Because there's a whole situation of like, she had to give that false report. If it meant, you know, giving Frank an opportunity to kind of have his identity. That was the, you know, biggest thing from it. But also, you know, it meant that Rollins got treated like a hero and stuff like that. Because for her, it's like, she felt like Frank deserved, you know, a chance. He saved her life multiple times. At the same time, it's like all that he lost and why he did the whole Punisher thing in the first place. It's like, you felt sympathetic for him, and that's what she was trying to do. But that was a hard pill to swallow. That was a heavy burden to bear, because it's like, for her, she fought so much for truth and justice. Everything she did the last season was for the truth, and it's like, at the end of the day, it's almost like it doesn't matter, you know? Because even the way Miriam was kind of trying to paint it, of like, this was the least of the most, of all the terrible choices in that regard, it was like, this was the least terrible one, you know? So I thought that was just kind of interesting. And obviously it was chipping away at her, because she had her own thoughts of like, this is how things go. So she was willing to skew that line, get Frank to come kill Billy, and even Curtis being like, you should have killed him, because it's like, because all of this is happening because you left him alive. And, you know, Frank, it's kind of interesting, because it's almost flip-floppy, because some moments you want Frank to do that, you demonize him for it at other moments, but other times embrace it and almost want him to be that killer. So it's like, make up your mind, what do you want from him? What do you want him to be? What do you need him to be in that regard? And I thought that was kind of such a fascinating aspect to see, not just from Dina, but also from Curtis in that regard. Because like, I feel like Curtis had it the most, where it's like he'd embrace who Frank was and kind of have his side, but at the same time demonize him, because it's just kind of like, your shit is kind of interfering with my life, you know? So I thought that was kind of such a fascinating element in that regard. But even to the point, like, Dina started backing away, because for her, it's like, what matters is like, because it's like the whole conversation of, because there's even moments she justifies what Frank does. Wrong word, not justify, but she understands. Because it's like, what's the difference between Billy and Frank? Frank, at the very least, if he did something, he'd go through hell torturing himself for it. Whereas most people feel like Billy probably wouldn't, because like, Billy's a very selfish dude. Everything he's ever done has been just because of, you know, greed. Whereas everyone, like, you know, in Frank's case, it's like, it's because what was done to him. Does that justify what he's done? But no, it does put you in that situation where you can kind of tip the scales of like the good he does versus the bad he does. And ultimately, that in the end will be what ultimately decides, you know, where Frank stands in a grand scheme of good and evil, you know, type of situation of like, Frank did his thing of not going after women or kids in certain regards. The women situation, just because it's like, well, unless they're like trained people come to kill him, that whole situation, then obviously that's a different thing. But it's like, oh, like this whole archaic system of his to justify what he does. No, but I think it's supposed to show that, you know, essentially that there is a lot more complexity to a man like Frank Castle. And I thought it was kind of interesting too, because even Dina was like, I actually envy Frank and Billy, because they can kind of not give a shit while also kind of pushing forward, and like they have clear focus on what their objective is, like pure clarity, you know? And I love that Frank said that line of like, it's not easy, because she's like, oh, it's so easy for you just to kill Billy and walk away. He's like, no, it's not easy. I can do it. I can put a man down, walk away, and it's nothing. But don't for a second say that it's easy, because it will always torture me in my head. But I will do it, because that's kind of what I kind of was forged into being and stuff like that. So I thought that was kind of like an interesting thing. And, you know, it's kind of interesting kind of balancing this with the whole Curtis situation of how he tried to he wanted Billy dead. He just wanted this all done because he wanted to have some normal life outside of all this. He had a girl that didn't last long in this season because that ultimately fell apart because he was so caught up helping out Frank, but he didn't want any of that to come back to his girl, Dila. And so balancing that, always trying to do the right thing. And for him, he kind of felt like he got so caught up in Frank's stuff. It's just kind of like, it, you know, because it's all felt like it was never ending and wanting, you know, because for him, it's like he's trying to do what he is, trying to help out these veterans, all these, you know, these military people who are just kind of lost, who felt like they had their backs turned on by everyone. He wants to be there for them, but he's caught up in all of this because you know, he feels, I think, you know, indebted to Frank, and he understands what Frank's been through and wants to be there and have his back no matter what. But also he's bound by this aspect of like Frank causes a shitstorm, and it's like I don't want to get caught up in that because it leads to just more and more and more, and there's just no getting away from that, you know. I mean, since I'm bringing him up so much, I should probably also talk about him is Frank himself. I thought it was kind of an interesting thing they did with Frank this season. Obviously, the whole like him and Beth situation at the beginning is almost like, oh, he has this happy thing. That actually went a little bit further than I thought it would. Like, I was even surprised when he was like, my name's Frank. I was like, oh shit, you actually told him that. I also thought it was kind of a neat element. It never came up in the season back again. Notice that too. I didn't even think about that. Frank never got his ring back about Maria. That's actually kind of depressing. I just thought about that because Pilgrim had it the entire season. Like, he lost it at the bar fight at the beginning and ended up never getting it back. I guess maybe on some level that was Frank's... I guess because he had his war in front of him, and I guess, you know, the way season 1 ended, him kind of, like, not going with Maria, you know, not dying and being reunited with her, that kind of cemented that. And I think that element of, like, not having the ring... Because, like, the last time we see it is, like, when Pilgrim... Well, I call him Pilgrim, but John ended up smashing his... room, and then you see him pick up the ring. Not unless that was supposed to be his ring. That could have been it, but I'm pretty sure you never see Frank get his ring back. So the fact is they made such a point to show that ring, it could be interpreted as either being John's ring, but like, I interpreted it as being Frank's ring that he secretly still had, but maybe I could be wrong. But nevertheless, but like I said, him trying, and then like everything in his life kind of falling into place of just like getting mixed up in this whole situation with Amy, which I'll talk about soon enough, and Curtis even being like, the fact of the matter is, you know, even the whole conversation him and Amy have later on of being like, it's easier for Frank to hate the world than trying to live in it, you know, and that's why he kind of spends so much time alone. I guess you could make the argument like maybe he sabotages everything because like Curtis is like, the fact of the matter is you are looking for a fight in this regard. The fact of the matter is, yeah, they came after you, but now you're actively going after him. And Frank's like, what do you want me to do? They're going to kill that girl, and you want me to just sit back? And what was the situation? I forgot what it was exactly he had said, but it was kind of like, that's not who I am. And I think it was like, you want me to turn a blind eye? I forgot what it was exactly, but it was something where he was like, I'm not like that, and you're not like that either, Curtis. So, but, It's actually kind of interesting too. I thought it was kind of a neat detail when John came to her, Beth early in the season. She gave him Pete's fake name. At no point did she mention Frank. I thought that was going to be an issue the moment she kept going on the Pete route. I thought before she mentioned this last time, I thought she was actually going to call him by his real name, Frank, because they made such a point. Because obviously he bonded with Beth, told her so much about himself, even the whole aspect of like getting to meet Rex and the whole pancake situation. Obviously the parallels between that and Frank Jr. I thought was kind of interesting. So they made such a point that I thought maybe in some shape or form that circle back to it, but no, because with everything that Frank got caught up in, he didn't want to, because he made a promise not to bring any of his crap to her doorstep, and he kind of did. She got shot because of it and everything. So, but I do like the Amy and Frank dynamic. I think it's from the trailers. Because I watched it like one time, the one trailer. I didn't like, cause I guess I didn't really process in my head how young Amy is, because she's like, what, 16 maybe? You know, she lied about her age, had all those different identities. But especially later on when they mentioned that Lisa would have been about 15 or whatever, it's like, okay, so that's definitely like the parallel. I mean, be fair, Frank is always kind of like that when it comes to kids. Like that's a tough spot for him. Not tough spot, but like that's a sore area for him. So he acts very differently in that regard. But it's like, you could tell they were making the parallels between Lisa and Amy, just because, especially Amy kind of kept bringing it up. It's like, oh, would you have ever wanted, you know, Lisa to go to a school like that. And Frank's like, I never thought about it. She's like, and you never think about her. He's like, don't even get that twisted. I always think about her. But like, who she could have been was something he never thought about. But Amy was kind of like, you should think about that. Who she would have been, the kind of life she would have led, like, you know, her being happy, her goals and dreams. Like, you know, I guess because it's almost like, by thinking about her like that, it's almost like keeping her alive in your life, in his mind, especially him after everything that he's been through, and it just being all bad. Because Frank even talks about it later on, and it's like the most heartbreaking thing. It's that conversation between him and Karen where it's like the only image he has of his family that really sticks to him is them when they were dead. And I was like, that's the heartbreak. Because, you know, we even saw it in season 1, because every time, like, because he was plagued by his own memory, the memory that kept playing was when his wife woke him up that day, and walking over would be Frank, you know, in the mask, pulling the trigger on her. And it's like, that's the only way he can see, like, he can almost reach out to them and to save them, but he's powerless to stop everything from falling apart, and that haunts him. And so even to the point he was kind of like, Frank Jr. and Lisa, like, he could, like, they didn't go slow. There was time for them to try and keep up a brave face, but almost have this look in their face like, why, you know? And it's just like, when he told that story, it kind of got you choked up, and you can tell it was choking up Karen, which I'll admit, I didn't expect to see Karen at all. It was kind of nice in that one episode. Really quickly, I'll go ahead and mention it. I was like, why the hell is Karen? I was like, where the hell are Karen's shoes? What the hell is up with that? And then they immediately go cut to Ed walking with the shoes. I'm like, oh, okay, so I guess that's his thing. He likes women's shoes or something. And I guess he made such a point for Karen, because I guess maybe they had, like, he just liked her shoes. Maybe it's kind of like, maybe it's a foot thing, or maybe it's just a shoe specific thing. But either way, I was like, that's so interesting. So that's why you're just walking around barefoot. I thought it was kind of interesting. What's also interesting about that, like, canonically speaking, this is like, that took place like after Daredevil season 3. So I like Frank being like, no, like, you know, does Matt know you're here? Like, go back. He's a good guy. Like, you know, I don't want you to get mixed up in everything. I just didn't expect them to ever, like, run into each other like they did. So I thought it was kind of interesting. I did like that in that moment, like, Karen's there, then Amy shows up, and then Dina's there, and you have Frank being like, gee, what the hell is going on? All three of you? Come on now. I just thought that wasn't his exact reaction, but it's just kind of like seriously, what the hell is going on? All three of you in my room like this at once. I thought that's kind of pretty neat. I guess, like, the 3 key ladies currently in his life at that point in time, so. But nevertheless, I kind of went off on a huge tangent, so I do apologize. I do kind of like the back and forth between Amy and Frank. I love the fact is that he got shot in the ass. He even brings it up, like, yeah, there's a first time for everything, because like, yeah, the first time I've ever gotten shot in the ass before, so that's a first. And she had to stitch him up and everything. He's like, first pull out the bullet and stuff like that. And she's like, to stitch it up. And she's like, you just assume because I'm a woman I know how to sew and stuff like that. It's not going to be good. He's like, I don't give a damn. Just close up the damn wound. I even love that whole situation of, like, and he's like, oh, I'm about to go. And he's about to put the tape. She's like, no, you don't need that. He's like, I don't need this. You're sure? She cut to him leaving the room, and then cut back to her with the tape on her mouth, zip tied to the bed yet again. I was like, that was nice. Also, like, that whole rough road joke at the beginning was kind of funny. That was kind of, like, very fucked up to say that to someone you just met. But, yeah, just kind of like the shift in a relationship, because you kind of like, and I thought that was such an interesting thing about Amy is, like, she was such a liar. Like, I'm surprised that didn't go on. Like, I was actually surprised, you know, it went on as long as it did, while also, because I was expecting her to hide stuff most of the season. It's like, she hit it for a couple episodes, but, like, man, is she good at lying. She likes shifting the narrative and stuff like that. Like that whole police station situation with Sheriff Hardin and his people. Side note, I thought that thing was going to go down way differently than it did. Ogden got messed up, but everyone else came out of that alive. I was actually kind of surprised when we ended up finding out Bruce is Ogden's brother. It's like, yeah, my own brother locked me up in here. It's like, worst time for your brother to lock you up because you're drunk. I mean, it's like, obviously it's family, familial, love and everything, but it's kind of like, yeah, he kind of picked the worst timing to do that considering everything that's going down right now, but still. But like I was saying, like, her being kind of the liar that she was, kind of her, like, constantly shifting the narrative of being like, yeah, I don't know what happened. That lady tried to kill me, and this dude kidnapped me, and God knows what would have happened to me if you hadn't. It's like, you were so good at lying. But now later on, you kind of find out why, because I was curious, like, what her background was going to be and stuff like that. It turns out she was rolling with a crew, like a lady Fiona took care of her, took her and the other kids under her wing. They basically ran scams and stuff like that, so we never actually got to see a lot of that work or really hear too much about it. We heard a little bit of it. I mean, that's ultimately where the whole, like, threat on her life situation ended up playing out. But I think, you know, once she learned about who Frank was, learned all about the Punisher and everything, what happened with his family, it's like we have a lot in common. And that's something I talked about, kind of the difference between Amy and Frank's relationship compared to Micro and Frank. Well, it's also because like it's a different dynamic, because Amy kind of feels that daughter role, whereas like Micro feels, kind of like a best friend role. But what's also interesting about it, because I brought this up in my thoughts and theories, kind of like Micro's family was still alive. Like he had to fake his death and stuff like that, but at least his family was still alive. In the case of Amy, she was kind of all alone. Like Frank, her family was killed in front of her. She came across their bodies and stuff like that. And also Frank's family was literally in the same situation. So, and that moment shifted everything in the relationship, because she was like, oh, like you understand me. And also like the way Frank kind of took care of her, taught her how to use the gun and everything, kind of how to defend herself. I thought that was kind of pretty neat. Like, you see that moment of Frank almost kind of treating her like a daughter. He never fully, I feel like, embraces that, but you see it, but he never outright says. I mean, to be fair, it's Frank. Frank never really big into discussing his feelings and stuff like that. So, and I personally think that is kind of like a lot of things kind of went down in this that I thought was kind of interesting in regard of like Frank, in the sense of how he kind of got involved in the situation he didn't want to get involved in. And I've talked about this before too, Amy's perspective of being like, the way you look, it's almost like you wanted an excuse to kind of go all balls to the wall like you did, essentially killing all those people like that. But also like that struggle Frank has this season, once again, because it's like so many people want him to be one thing, and he's labeled this and he's labeled that. Brett popping up, I wasn't expecting him to pop up as much as he did. He popped up in one episode last season, so to see him actually pop up in like a multitude of episodes like that and kind of be like a consistent angle to this, because whereas you have like a lot of other people, yes, they have their issues with Frank, but they kind of like, they okay a lot of stuff he does. Amy kind of okays a lot of stuff he does. Dina has her issues, but she kind of co-signs a lot of stuff he does. Not directly. She has the huge conflict that she does, and so does Curtis, but it's like Brett, I feel like, is the only character that is consistently not making excuses for Frank and what he does. I don't even think Frank makes excuses for what he does, because that's the thing, and it's something that comes up in the season I thought was kind of interesting, where Frank, on some level, even if it's a minuscule amount, whether he'll really admit it or not, he thinks on some level that he is a good guy, that he is better than any of the people he took down, because they're pieces of shit that kind of deserve to go to hell. He literally says that later on. I also love the Turk thing. I love that. I bring that up every time I see him. I love that Turk is like this running gag in this like Netflix Marvel situation. I love that. And Frank going to him and he's like, yo, you hustling and stuff like that? He's like, yeah, I'm all about that life now, Turk. And it's just like, yo, I still want to know, does Turk know that Frank was the dude that tried to jack him for the guns last season? He only walked away with that pink gun. I don't know if Turk knows that was Frank, but I love that him being like, the moment he sees Frank in his reflection, he's like, hell no. Frank's like, hell yeah. It's like, I love that. Everything that went down to Turk is like, yo, man, I only did what they told me to, Frank. And he's like, yeah, I know you played your part well. He's like, I never want to see you again. He's like, the feeling's mutual. So that was kind of interesting. I always love when my boy Turk shows up, just to be, if he's not screwing people over, he's always just kind of like the butt of the joke in all of this too, so it's just kind of interesting how that ends up playing out like that. But kind of going back to what I was talking about before, kind of like that complicated nature that is Frank, even with what he does, like even kind of going back to the Ogden thing, he's like, hey kid, you did good. You going out there trying to save the day and stuff like that, that was brave of you, kid. You that's the bravest thing I've ever seen or I've ever known someone to do. But you need to lay down before you bleed out. It's just, go ahead, kid, go on, rest. And it's like, showing that, Frank has that point of view where he does respect people, where he understands where they're coming from. And, I don't know, like that, he isn't the monster that he thinks he is. And that's something that I thought was kind of a nice element. That's what I think it's nice about Karen being one of the few people that sees Frank in a way that no one else, not even he himself, sees. Like, other people see it to a certain extent, but even Karen's like, no matter what you do, I will never look at you different. That she cares about him like that. And I even love Amy coming in later on and be like, wow, you two look so... It's like, oh, you two look so cute, but can we like stop this heart-to-heart moment before we leave and everything? But like, once again, it was like, he didn't want to get Karen mixed up in everything that he had to do, because it's kind of like he didn't want to drag her down that path, because for him it's like, I know you, Karen, you are brave, you are strong, but you are super stubborn. And if I allow it, you'll end up sacrificing your entire life to help me. And he's like, I can't and I won't let you do that for me. Least of all people, me, you know? So, and I also like the interesting parallels between Billy and Frank. I feel like, in all honesty, maybe I'm not thinking about it clearly or remembering it, they didn't seem like they were in many scenes together, which is such a fascinating thing. Like, that big animosity, they actually spent so much of that time not really in the same rooms, I feel like. I think that's kind of interesting. But especially when they first met, because even Frank talked about it, it's like, he looked at me like we were still brothers, and he was actually shocked and hurt that I actually pointed a gun at him. You know, because like Billy didn't remember at that point in time what he had did to Frank until Dina breaks it down to him. It's like, no, I would never do that to Frank. Even justifying it later on, even if I did do that to Frank, why would he do this to me and not just put me down? Like, if we were in the same situation, I would have put him out of his misery, which is interesting because that's literally how episode 12 played out. You know, when Rollins was kind of working him over, like Billy was trying to be compassionate. It's like, no, I'm gonna make it quick. He doesn't deserve this. So it's kind of interesting that kind of did kind of get brought up like that. So I think that was kind of what they were going for, to kind of put that on the opposite foot like that in that regard. I mean, I guess you could make the argument they made that decision back in season one's finale when they made Frank do that to Billy instead of putting him down, you know, even when Billy was literally begging for him to. Like, to me, like, that just all plays into what I think worked very nicely in this season, is the fact is that they made so many people conflicted in certain regards. Like, I think it's a season where you can honestly say no one literally walked away 100% clean. Because even Dina later on admits, like, the reason why she felt bad about all this is because she was like, it wasn't all on Frank. Everything that went down is because Frank wasn't even in New York until I dragged him back here because I had my vendetta against Billy, you know? Because she was almost like, if you're not going to be here to help me find Billy, then what's the point? What good are you? What are you actually doing for me, Frank, you know? So I also love that Amy stole her credit card and bought a whole bunch of stuff, was wearing her clothes and like, ooh, I'm Agent Dina Madani and stuff like that. I thought that was kind of interesting. I even love Frank calling her out. I was like, what are you doing stealing her stuff? Don't you think she's going to be pissed when she comes back here? It's like, when is she ever happy? And then Frank sees a pizza and he's like, holy shit, and then goes and enjoys it. So I thought that was kind of pretty neat. It's actually kind of interesting. Frank ends up bringing this later on about like why he ended up helping Amy. It's like because of what she said at that rough road line, but also because like he could tell her, the tougher she looked, the more he can tell that was her just faking it because she was just that scared. And I thought, in all honesty, like the only time you've ever really seen her break down throughout the episode of the season was like when Frank yelled at her like about kind of playing games, because obviously she didn't realize the shitty situation that Frank had just come out of, but she threw the tennis ball and tried to turn it into a game, and he's like, do you not realize what's going on? Shoots the shot next to her. And it was like, you know, something that Curtis had said was like, he does care about you, he's just kind of going about it his weird crazy way. The fact of the matter is he just wants you to survive all this. And she even goes, yeah, he must really like you because you're the only person that's ever stood up to him without getting your ass kicked. So I even love it later on because they point the guns at Mahoney and everything. Curtis is like, the fact of the matter is it ain't gonna take them long to find Frank Castle's his black friend with the one leg. And then Frank's like, well, sorry to tell you like this, you know, but I do have a lot of them. And they're laughing about it. He's like, I'm sorry. He's like, nah, don't worry, Curtis. You're always going to, you know, be the only one for me. So I thought that was kind of a little funny moment. But even the whole situation with the Schultz kind of took me by surprise. Because I wasn't sure, because I didn't know what John's whole storyline was going to be, like why he was really after Amy. It's actually kind of like a sad, like, I think the reason why they came after him is even more depressing thing, because it's like, well, John is, you know, caught up in his whole situation. I saw those tattoos at first. I was like, are those supposed to be Nazi tattoos? Turns out to be Nazi-ish tattoos, which I love that whole scene because Fosco from Person of Interest popped up. I was like, hey, I'm blanking on that actor's name. I know it, and it pisses me off I don't know it. But I got excited. I was like, hey, Fosco. I also like how they did that scene where they cut to like John in the aftermath in his hotel room fixing himself up, like pulling the teeth out of his forehead, putting his jaw back into place and stuff like that. It's like as the wounds were happening to him, it kind of cuts to him in the aftermath, like fixing himself up. That was a brutal ass scene. He literally disemboweled like two dudes. that poor dude, the last person he killed, is actually kind of sad because that dude, like the actor who plays Fusco from Person of Interest, was talking about, yo, that kid looked up to you back in the day. You were like his hero. You were a god to him and stuff like that. And it's like, wow, that's so fascinating. But getting back to what I was bringing up before, it's just kind of like that whole situation of like this super religious group. I was thinking, like, is this like some kind of cult or something like that? It's like, no. Anderson, played by Corbin Benson, which, you know, thing I'm best known from, it's like Papa Spencer, you know, Henry from Psych, and Onette O'Toole. That was crazy to me because I was like, what? Because I think I saw that they were going to be in this. I saw some images or something. I was like, that's so cool. Best known for playing Martha from Smallville, you know, Mama Kent. She's also in the It movie, not the recent remake, but the original one from the 90s. She played the adult version of the character, like the second part of that. So I just thought it was kind of interesting. That's like another thing I kind of know her from, kind of well know. But the main thing I know her from is Smallville. She's also in one of the, what is it? Superman movies. One of the Christopher Reeves ones. I forgot which one it was. I think she played Lois Lane in one of them in actuality. Maybe. Which that's always kind of, I was about to go on a tangent. It's not worth going down, but nevertheless. But their whole, the Schultz whole situation of being like, oh, all this is about is a picture of their son being caught kissing someone. Basically, they were hiding the fact is that their son was gay. And basically, they had planned out his whole life of like they wanted him to go to the presidency. The whole him being gay potentially would have been used against him, but what would have made it worse is the fact is that it was hidden and they lied about it for so much, so that would have hurt even more. But that's what this was all about. People died and were killed, ranging from kids to so many innocent people, just to cover this up. And, you know, it's actually sad because David ended up finding out the truth about his parents. Like, what he does beyond that, we never got to know, but that's sad that things kind of played out like that, because it's like, it shows you how terrible they are. And the fact is they constantly manipulated John, being like, oh, knew his wife Rebecca was in the condition she was in, but she's like, I want you to be the last thing I see when I leave this earth. And, you know, them kind of trying to put this like religious spin on everything, you know, and that, you know, like I said, it was almost like, for him, because for John, he got a second chance, considering what his life was before and everything. Like, he made a lot of changes. And I guess being near his old life again, he kind of slipped a little bit, dealing with everything, trying to hunt down Frank as well as Amy, but also being away from his wife while she's dying. You know, all that kind of took itself, I guess being reminded of his past and kind of being as brutal as he was in that fight scene kind of made him go, you know, hey, here I am. He just got swept up in that world again, I guess, you know. How that actually ended up playing out kind of was crazy to me. I wasn't like, I'm not too surprised, because I'm sure, because Frank actually made a point this entire season to make it so that Amy never actually killed anyone. Because when she shot that guy in the fence, when she pulled off the move, and the dude was like, you're not going to, and shot him. And like Frank killed the dude just to be like, see, you shot him, you didn't kill him, I killed him, just so that she wouldn't have to bear that weight. Because it's like, yeah, she played her part, but like he didn't want her to be responsible for it. That's why, I mean, obviously he was defending her, but I thought it was kind of interesting because, like, honestly, I was going to come in here, 2 guns, 1 bullet each, and give you 2 a choice. But then your wife, she made her choice, and it kind of gave Anderson that same choice too. After everything that he's done, either live with the truth coming out or die. And we see at the end, you know, we hear the gunshot and see the flash from it. So it's like he chose the easy way out. It's also interesting during that fight Frank had with John. I love that kind of pause, and Frank was like, you need a minute? And John being like, I was waiting for you. I thought that was just kind of an interesting moment in the fight between them. Once again, bringing it up, like, Frank gets super blood. Like, the one fight that made me go, ugh, there's certain violence that kind of makes you go, ugh, kind of makes you scrunch up a little bit. Like, this show, like, I feel like even Daredevil, because Daredevil was brutal, but it's not nearly as brutal as, but especially like the way, like, Frank, like when he was fighting the Russians and he was swinging those weights around and shit, it's like, ugh, ugh. When he was bashing home the big dude's face in with like one of those weights like that, it's like, ugh, it kind of makes you kind of, ugh. You actually kind of feel bad for them too, because later on John kills them. It's actually really sad too, because there's that dude that was trying to be with his daughter and his wife, and Frank actually let him go. He's like, it was not for your sake. I also thought that was kind of an interesting thing too, kind of once again showing that Frank's protective side of like he wanted to kill that perverted dude with the whole cameras taking pictures of little girls, that piece of shit. And Frank being like, and Emmy being like, no, don't kill him. She's like, I appreciate it. It's all for my sake and everything, but you don't have to do that. Yeah, he's a creep and stuff like that. She's like, oh, you almost look a little disappointed. She's like, you don't have to kill him, but you can burn the place down, and then walk away having burnt the place down. I'm like, it's kind of interesting that she had to pep him up a little bit. It's like, no, it's okay. You can do some damage, Frank. You can burn the place down. And so it's like, Frank, it's almost kind of like a caveman thing of like, Frank, feel better, like, or something like that. So it's just kind of interesting to me that ended up being, a thing. I feel like his name also got thrown out a lot more too. Like, I feel like, well, I mean, he was dead supposedly for most of the season 1 of this, because obviously his name got thrown around a lot more in season 2 of Daredevil, like the whole Punisher moniker. Even the fact is he wore the skull a lot more this season, I thought was kind of interesting. What's also interesting, it wasn't like a new skull either. It was like the literal same armor he had near the end of last season with the skull painted on it. Still got the bullets in it and everything. It's kind of interesting because Dina kept it the entire time. I think that also shows you kind of how obsessed she was kind of with everything, but maybe it's just kind of rather keep it hidden rather than letting Frank have it, just on the off chance he might kind of tote it around and stuff like that. But I also like that being an aspect to Billy too, that actually gave him nightmares because he couldn't remember things clearly. All he could remember was the skull, the broken glass and stuff like that. I won't lie to you, like, I actually kind of like the mask angle. Like I said, it's interesting because it's like what it obviously represents, because it's supposed, his memories are like a jigsaw, and like his psyche is like a jigsaw. I figured like it was supposed to be, because I brought it up before. I don't know much about the character Jigsaw in general. Like I said, I've seen him pop up in a video game one time when I saw someone like play the Punisher video game. I was like, I saw him pop up that one time. Other than that, I don't really know the character. So I figured the whole Jigsaw thing was supposed to be like representation of both his face as well as his mind. It kind of worked in 3 regards, well, technically 2 in this regard, because Billy had the whole mind thing, his mind kind of being broken like it was, but that also kind of connected to his memories, but also his face. It's also interesting too, because that whole thing was like, he painted the mask like that because it's like, what face do you want to show to the world? I thought it was kind of interesting too, when he did the whole thing of like, gathering up all those other people, like that whole Valhalla situation of like, oh yeah, we're going to, it's kind of interesting because to me, that moment when he created Valhalla of like, oh, like you remaining guys, we're going to create something that's for us. It made me think like, oh, it's interesting because it's like, it made me think he almost slipped back into being the original Billy that he was back in season 1. Because it made me I thought it was very reminiscent of his speech he gave to Anvil, to Lewis and all those guys back in season 1. So that's what kind of immediately went in my mind. But the whole him kind of like creating a brother, like even saying the whole line of like brotherhood and stuff like that, them even having their mask and stuff like that, it's actually kind of a shame because they set that trap for Frank. And the reason why Frank ended up getting the chance to kick their asses like he did, because the whole point was not to kill Frank because they didn't have any actual ammunition and stuff like that, at least to my knowledge and stuff like that. They only had those weapons because they were supposed to slice and hurt him, because the whole point was to break him. And poor bastards, like most of them ended up dying during that fight and stuff like that. But that scene where Frank thought he killed those ladies was so sad, because I was like, because you could tell like it broke him, because he's like, he had a code of like, these are innocent women. Like the whole point was to do it while they were gone, and it made him fall apart. It's kind of interesting because unintentionally, Curtis went through the same thing, because he ended up killing one of those soldiers. He knew they weren't necessarily bad people. They were people being swayed by Billy, but it wasn't just them being, it's not just them being, soldiers that he had to do that to. It was also because he was coming at it from a different perspective, because he was a medic. He always sewed people up. He never killed anyone. And this time, he wasn't trying to, he was just trying to wound a dude, but it led to the guy bleeding out, and it's like the guy died, and that was on him. Once again, kind of switching back to like, you're working with Frank and you're fine with everything. Not necessarily fine, but you kind of live with it, but then the next moment kind of hate him. Like, to me, it just, there was that level of almost hypocrisy in certain regards, in my head. I feel like he also like had a tendency to kind of bail out when Frank needed him most. It's like, oh, I needed you to watch over Amy. What did you do? You just left. I get what you were trying to do. You're trying to track down Billy. Once again, it's like you did stuff for yourself while also saying it's for other people, and you're kind of pissed at Frank because you're like, oh, Frank's just doing his own thing. He's not doing anything for us, for anyone else, that he's selfish and stuff like that. It's like Frank did so much for other people, and it just feel like he got so much shit for it. But I thought it was kind of interesting. Well, and then there's also the situation later on taking David like that, even though Amy needed y'all to keep David, because it's like, yeah, they needed to be traded in that whole situation, but Curtis made that decision on his own. Once again, trying to do the right thing. So it's like, I'm not trying to demonize him. It's just kind of something I kept noticing. I thought was kind of interesting. But I also thought Frank kind of brought up this point of like, the fact of the matter is, he was like, I thought I became a monster after what happened to my family. I thought before I was like any other dude and stuff like that, but it took my family dying for me to become what I am. But it's like, I've always been this. I always have been and always was. Maria saw me for what I was and still loved me anyway. So me being who I am, this whole Punisher thing, that's who I really am. Let me do me. Let me be who I need to be in this situation. So it's embracing that Punisher side of himself, because he was so conflicted. Because I think, because for him, it's like, the moment I try to be anyone else, innocent people get hurt. The moment I embrace who I am, that's when shit gets done. But because like I said, with the ladies and stuff like that, he was even to the point he was going to let that cop who was coming after him for the bounty, it's like, go ahead and kill me and stuff like that, just because he felt so guilty about it. But it turns out it wasn't him. It was Billy. And I love how they did that scene too, because they show Billy lining up the bullets, and it's like, yeah, those ladies died because of us. Are you going to live with that? And she's like, like, I forgot what Dumont was saying, but he was like, no, I don't want you to end up blaming me afterwards, But for her, it's like, I love you. Like, I want us to be together. And if it means kind of our happiness, then, I'll do whatever it takes for us. But like them revealing it later on to be like, oh yeah, these ladies were all shot, and you see Billy picking up the bullet casings, like, that's what the bullets were representing. I was like, what is that all about? I thought that, like, it's interesting how like they edit it like that reveal like that. It's like, oh, Frank was kind of set up in that regard. Because even Brett, like, under his like situations, like, I feel like last season he cut Frank a little bit more slack than he did this season, definitely, just because he didn't like the way Frank handled things, because it just caused more stuff. Because for him, it's like, he's already lived through the Punisher doing some stuff twice. It's like all of season 2, well, chunks of season 2 of Daredevil, as well as everything that kind of went down specifically in that hotel last season. That played a big role in that too. But everything that Frank was kind of getting mixed up in, bodies were dropping left and right. And I thought that was such an interesting, like I said, bring that element, especially because in contrast to Dina, I also love that she shot him earlier in this season. She's like, damn it, why didn't you identify yourself? It's like, luckily he was wearing that vest. But that was also something too, I was like, why didn't Dina just ever bring Mahoney in? I feel like if you had brought him in on the truth, I mean, I guess it was so much, because it was her own personal vendetta. Like, she had to go after Billy. She had to be the one to take him down. And even if she wasn't, she needed him gone because, she thought it would fix everything. Sadly, it wouldn't. But the whole thing of like keeping stuff from him, it's like, I think things would have worked out more if she had just told the truth and been a little honest from the beginning, but it turns out not to be the case. That whole Dumont confrontation didn't go down. Like, I wasn't sure how that was all going to play out. Especially because she was like slowly going to confront her and stuff like that, and just like once again kind of showing just like the level of how far Dumont had gone. I thought it was so interesting. Her and Dina, that whole thing, like even a point like she was pointing a knife at Dina and the knife starts sliding into her face. I was like, ugh, into like Dina's face, but then Dina got her near the window, and because Dumont kind of has her whole thing where she kind of gets like, I guess like the way her vision kind of messes up like that, I guess. I don't know if that'd be considered vertigo or not, but like obviously she had her aversion to it. Like obviously they played it up like her trying to face her fears throughout the season, and so because of that, I guess she kind of wasn't properly balanced and ended up getting flung out the window. I was like, because I was scared at him. I was like, oh, Billy's going to come back and Billy literally is looking outside and looks up and sees Dina. Dina gets locked and loaded because she saw him too, and it's like, ugh. That was scary for a second. I was like, okay, cops get there or something. I'm like, oh my God, but don't tell me you're going to kill Dina. Don't kill Dina. Don't kill. Okay, luckily he didn't kill Dina. She did put like 3 bullets in him and he still kept coming. He's like, yeah, he's kind of stubborn like Frank. I also love that situation of Billy, like, get these bullets out of me. I was like, oh shit. Because I also thought it was kind of interesting. Like, because when it all came down to it, technically, like, I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense too. Because Well, because Billy and Frank didn't have like the blowout they did in season one's finale. That was the big final showdown. In this case, it was more so like John versus Frank in that regard. But it was so interesting how I was like, oh, Billy's about to get back together. I thought like when he got heel patched up and stuff like that, I thought like, oh, like potential setup for another season. I'll talk about that later on and stuff like that. But I thought that was like, oh, like push him even further as like the next villain or something like that. So I was like, oh, that's going to be interesting. And so when Billy passed out and that dude's looking at the money, I'm like, that bastard's about to rob you. And it's like he literally dumped Billy in a dumpster, and even Billy couldn't help but laugh at the whole situation. I was actually kind of surprised by that. Like, I didn't know whether Curtis, when he was like, oh, I'm in your basement and stuff like that, I didn't know how Curtis was going to handle that. He called Frank. And then Billy's like, I'm glad it's you that's here, because he didn't want to die alone and stuff like that. And he was kind of like, it's kind of interesting because before that ended up happening, Dumont was like, the fact of the matter is, Billy won't die. He's too strong. Because I think it was interesting too, because Dina kind of got her satisfaction because she's like, the fact of the matter is, going to your place actually was therapy for me because putting 3 bullets in Billy, like all of his blood, it's his. It's like, oh, he'll get you for what you've done to me. It's like, no, you did this to yourself. We'll tell you when we find him and stuff like that. And it's like, we never got that, what happens after that, which is kind of sad. But Billy being like, at the end, he was like, yo, I'm glad you're here, Frank. I just want you to know, no matter what happened, bam, bam, bam. Well, bam, bam. And it's like, whoa. I mean, because I think Frank wasn't trying to listen. Like, he'd already felt all he had to feel. Like, there was like this was always going to only end one way. And I guess technically Billy got what he wanted. Like, Frank didn't let him bleed out like he could have, like made him suffer. I guess because there's also the chance of like, yeah, you came back. Because that was the whole thing too. Dina was like, literally Dina, Rafi, and Marion all said the whole thing of like, no one expected him to actually get up and come back from what he did. The bastard's too stubborn to die, literally dragging himself from hell. But I guess you can, like I said, make the argument that Frank kind of did him the service of just making it quick. But either way, Frank ended it. So I was like, that was nicely kind of tied up, even the whole John situation, John reuniting with his boys, because because that was a situation, Frank had a soft spot when it came to, parents and their kids, because for him, it's like, because even John was like, I heard you never got a chance to save your kid. What would you do if you were in my situation? He's like, I'd do anything. And he's like, here we are. And Frank's like, here we are. But the moment he heard about he's like, when you kill them, talking about the Schultz, please don't hurt my boys. He's like, I know, at the end of the day, he was kind of like, I know who you are, what kind of person you are. And even when it was all said and done, he let John and his boys go because he was, boys already lost their mom too. So it's only fair to let them have their dad back. It's a complicated situation. It probably wasn't the easiest thing for Amy because it's like, John was the go-to guy. I'm pretty sure, she never outright said it, but I'm fairly certain he's the dude that was like, the one that killed all her friends and stuff like that. So, because she was alluding to it the entire time. So, I am kind of bummed that Amy doesn't get to stick around because it would have been interesting. Because technically Frank doesn't really have a sidekick in this season. Just because obviously the whole micro thing, which I talked about before, is it makes sense. David's story played out the way it did, got reunited with his family, the whole vigilante thing. Probably not something really rolling with him. But I was thinking hey, maybe Amy's going to fill that role. But it's nah. For Frank, it's go live your life, Put all this stuff behind you. I know it's not the easiest thing. But also, cut out all that blackmailing, scam stuff too. Just live your life, be a kid. Him and Curtis hooked her up with a person in Florida that can help her with the whole marine salvage situation. But Frank had talked about the fact is that there's some things that happen in your life that kind of, what was it he said, that kind of essentially work out for you, make you better. And it's him and her had that moment of hugging each other. And it's after everything they've been through, they built this bond together and everything. And so I like that. Like I said, I wish there was more from it. At the very least, you kind of hope maybe they stay in contact, but I'm sure Frank kind of keeps her at a distance because he doesn't want to drag her into everything. You had Dina walking away from her job, which was very surprising. But for her, I guess it's just kind of she realized it wasn't what she thought it was anymore. So interestingly enough, she goes to work for the CIA. I guess it's kind of which is just interesting considering everything you've kind of had to deal with that, like, just because of Rollins. But I guess Rollins is kind of an anomaly. Marion's whole situation, I guess that kind of leads you to being like, oh, no, people in that position are bad. So it's just kind of interesting in that regard. Like I said, the Brett thing was kind of interesting. Like Brett, like at every turn being like, yo, I'm going to take you down, Castle, like I said, he was coming from a point of view of like, I'm a good, honorable dude. And it's like, you can understand, because it's actually interesting because it's actually something I thought I should have brought up earlier, like the whole like zip tying Amy situation that Frank was doing. It's like, if you looked at that from this series, outside of this series, if you didn't know about Frank or whatever, you think this is like some messed up drama of some bad guy kidnapping a girl. Like if you looked at it from a different lens and a different context, this could be out of a different movie under different contexts. Also, gotta give mad shout out to like Debbie and stuff like that. Her tripping about the cost and stuff like that. It's like, oh, you also gotta pay for tonight. No, but it's clearly morning. Yeah, but that's because, but you coming during my night shift, so you're gonna pay blah 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 blah. Even Frank being like, wait, you want me to pay more? She's like, yeah, well, what about a couple's coming or something? And I had to give the only last twin place to you. And he's like, well, you expecting like a convention or something? He's like, no, but it's the principle of the matter. He's like, fine, whatever, You're almost the same, basically, like you're a piece of work lady or something like that, But I even love the whole situation of like, yo, where's Castle at the end? And Dina and Curtis being like, who? After the whole Billy situation of, because even Dina being like, fact of the matter is, hey, maybe I'm the person that put the other 2 bullets in him and stuff like that. You can definitely tell she was in the process of kind of finally moving on. Curtis they finally got the freedom I think they wanted, and that kind of loose fear, like of him kind of being removed from the the playing field and stuff like that. And so beyond that, beyond seeing Dina, we don't really see what happened to Curtis, but you can assume he kind of picks his life back up, because everyone's kind of walking away from Frank, because Frank wanted to give everyone an opportunity to kind of live their lives again. And so we see him at the end kind of going full Punisher and stuff like that. Like, it's kind of the route I expected, because each time he would kind of push himself aside, because obviously he wanted to be, he was given the opportunity to, so he was trying to be Pete and everything, but now it's just kind of like fully embracing who he is, because even Dina's like, I got a job for you, and he's like, I already got a job, you stay safe, and he does what he does. So like I said, like overall I thought it was like a great season, and just how they handled a lot of stuff was very, very interesting. Obviously the question comes up, is there going to be a season 3? I highly doubt it. Literally at this point in time, even before the season aired, I'm like, yeah, this is going to be it. Just because Netflix has been to that point where it's slicing and dicing all the other shows. Like, there's always a possibility. But with every other show, it's kind of getting slimmer and slimmer. But at this point, there's a flicker in my head that's like, if it does well enough, maybe they'll consider it, but maybe it's just not worth it, not profitable. The licensing deals they have to do with Disney and Marvel with the whole situation might not be worth it in their regard, because the whole conversation is like they don't need the Marvel shows anymore, so that's a whole thing. But in all honesty, season 1 kind of did the same thing. It left the whole thing open with the whole Jigsaw situation with Billy, but that was like the only open thing left, to a certain degree. But in this degree, it seems like everything kind of got wrapped up. Everyone's particular storyline got kind of like neatly tied up in a bow and everything. And you kind of see Frank kind of going down more the vigilante route. Thing is, he doesn't even have the van anymore either, because he gave that to John and his sons to use. So there was that. I was kind of hoping he got it at the end, but it was like, no, that was like a truck or something he was in. So I doubt there's going to be a season 3 of this, but like, even if there isn't, like, I'd still be interested to see what they would do with it. But I feel like you told the story you wanted to tell, like, especially like Frank's progression. I don't know whether they went into this knowing that this was the final season. I think that, this was all done before they really before everything else started getting axed, like Iron Fist, Luke Cage, even Daredevil, that whole thing. So, but I think they're in a position where it's kind of like, even if the show goes away, it's still kind of like a good, solid endpoint to be like, every storyline is literally wrapped up. But obviously, I still feel like there's room you can go. But even the whole like Billy thing, I think like he's one of those villains where it's like you can't really necessarily keep him around. You're kind of done all you've done with him in particular. I thought like maybe they were going to do more with his old Valhalla guys. But the others that were still alive, he was like, yeah, you go. I thought maybe they were not going to listen and try and go after Frank and end up dead anyway. But it's like, it seems like they kind of skipped out of town and did their own thing too. It's kind of sad. Like Billy had that whole happy moment, come like, oh, give me flowers, something blue. It's kind of interesting because even the flowers they mentioned, I think might been a little callback. I forgot what they call it. They're that pea flower, like I forgot what it is. It's the flowers. Frank bought Sarah last season. He only got them because those were the flowers Maria liked, and it just happens that Sarah liked them. Though that could have just been the fact is it was Frank / Pete giving her the flowers in that whole situation. But nevertheless, so like I said, just everything kind of wrapped up nicely. So even if there isn't a season 3, which once again I highly doubt there will be, I think everything kind of ends nicely where you're kind of like, I'm kind of satisfied in everything. So like I said, I still would have wanted kind of like still kind of an Amy and Punisher team up, but at the same time I understand why it played out that way, because Frank wanted her to have some semblance of a normal life, especially considering what she had come from, what she had experienced. So I thought it was kind of nicely kind of tying that all together. Even that line, and I think that resonates so much with just the Punisher in general, of like, Frank isn't really a good guy, not really a bad guy. Frank is just Frank, And it's like, because even like that whole conversation between Brett and Dina about that. He's like, what am I supposed to do with that? She's like, I don't know what to tell you about it. Because, Frank had saved him literally the same way he had saved Dina. And she threatened to shoot him he had threatened to shoot Frank in the back, but he couldn't, just because it's like, it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of people that threatened to shoot Frank but didn't, because I think that whole Punisher thing makes you go, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Amy had her shot at doing it. Brett had his shot at doing it. Neither one did it. That whole thing. But like I said, it just kind of like just adding to the complexity that is the Punisher. It kind of and I think that's kind of a telling aspect about the character that makes you feel conflicted, because you understand why he does what he does. That he does have this code that he goes about things this way, but at the same time it's kind of like you can kind of disagree with his methods. Like I think he's a very interesting take on the whole like anti-hero. I think he's kind of like the greatest symbolism of an anti-hero in my regard, of not just like he kills people, but also just the complexity that is him. I mean, I don't know, like I'm not that familiar with the character, but I think John Barenthal did a very fantastic job kind of bringing that complexity to the character, in my opinion. But nevertheless, I've been literally sitting here rambling on and on, so I think that's pretty much it. I'm sure there's a lot more that I meant to talk about, but when it comes to these recordings and stuff like that, a lot of stuff slipped my head. So if you want to have more conversations, just obviously comment in the comments down below. You'll probably refresh my brain about certain stuff that I forgot to talk about. That I'm like, oh yeah, I meant to talk about that, but I didn't. That type of thing, the usual. So. But really, I think that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.